Hello, I am Mirna de Cos, Director of Business Development at Palms Behavioral Health in Harlingen. Our mission at Palms Behavioral is to educate patients and families about the importance of mental health. Today, the silent epidemic known as suicide is affecting many people and their loved ones. All generations have their silent epidemic for the teen populations. From the 1960s to the 80s, it was teen pregnancy. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it was alcohol and drug misuse. And beginning in the mid-90s to present day, it is suicide. In the last 40 years, youth suicide rates have more than tripled. We will lose about 5,900 young people to suicide each year, which means that each week we are losing about 113 young kids to suicide. We will never know the true number because of misreported suicides, which some believe could make the reported number 30 to 50% higher. According to the latest CDC's national data reporting, in Texas, suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 14. And suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 12 to 18. And suicide is the third leading cause of death for the college-aged youth, ages 18 to 22. Which means in Texas, every day on average, a young person is lost to the silent epidemic of youth suicide. Here are some important findings on suicide. 4 out of 5 completed suicides gave clear warning signs before the attempt. In 80% of suicide attempts, we have an opportunity to recognize the signs and intervene. It is important not to normalize suicide, and we must not understate the impact of a suicide on youth families. There are many stigmas and myths surrounding suicide. This can lead to misinformation and a lack of understanding. Here are some myths that are commonly spread about suicide. Talking to someone about suicide will give them the idea for suicide. Many people believe this is true, but it is false. Asking people if they are thinking about suicide does not give them the idea. When a young person is thinking about suicide, we must help them confront the pain. Doing this will help relieve some of the stress. We must give them the opportunity to talk about their feelings and start finding other solutions to the pain. Someone who often talks about suicide is not at risk. This is also false. Someone who often talks about suicide is more than likely thinking about it. According to Mental Health America, people who talk about suicide, threaten suicide, or call suicide centers are 30 times more likely to commit suicide. People who die by suicide usually talk about it first. So we must take it seriously and offer to get them help. This will help them through their pain and hopelessness. Suicide is impulsive and there's nothing we can do to prevent it. Again, false. Some acts of suicides may be impulsive, but most suicides are attempted after planning and discussing their thoughts with others. There are almost always warning signs. Many times there is a trigger event that looks like the cause of a suicide. Suicide is usually thought about for a while before any action is taken. So we want to be able to identify those that are feeling hopeless and offer them the right help to them, before they get to the point of thinking that suicide is the answer to their problems and pains. Often, signs of concerns are apparent leading up to the suicide attempt. Some of the concerns are as follows: previous suicide threats, depression, out-of-character behavior, and final arrangements. When it comes to teenagers, any 1 or 2 of these signs could be adolescent growing pains. However, if 2 or more of these signs are present, this should be a warning sign for further investigation and discussion with the teen. But still, when we see even 1, we need to investigate. Sadly, many people who attempt suicide and fail are most likely to attempt again. 1 out of 3 completed suicides are not the first attempt by the victim. It's important to listen and take those so-called half-hearted attempts seriously. They are serious calls for help that can be disguised as dark jokes or humor. The best thing we can do is be trustworthy sources for the kids who are thinking about suicide. We teach kids to never keep an attempt secret from parents, doctors, school counselors, or mental health providers. It could save a life. Many kids may be prone to suicide than other kids because of existing risk factors. These factors can be from the environment they come from, traumatic events, negative relationships with family and/or friends. Here are some elevated risk factors that make kids more likely to attempt suicide. Perfectionists, the leaders of the school, the kind of kid that puts pressure on him or herself or feels others put pressures on them to succeed. The type of young person we lose most often in this country is the high achiever, the school leader. This is not the picture that most people have of a suicidal type of young person. Frankly, the higher the achiever, the higher the possible risk. Depressed teenagers, loners, no support group or friends, isolated, and lack of social support. Low self-esteem, they don't feel worthy or worthy of good things. Changes in school status. This can happen when a young person moves to a new school. Abused or molested youth. We can only imagine the trauma they experience. Bullying. Children and teens who are bullied, as well as others who are the bully, are at an increased risk of depression and suicidal thought. Gay and lesbian youth, dealing with the identity and ridicule and most often isolation from mainstream. The learning disabled. Difficulty sitting through classes all day when everyone else seems to understand the concept. Students in trouble, real trouble, especially for the very first time. Users of drugs and alcohol. It is true, many suicidal teens have a problem with drugs or alcohol. However, this is not the cause. It is also true that the use of drugs or alcohol can increase the risk of suicidal thoughts. This is because it lowers our inhibitions and brings on risky behavior. When drugs and alcohol no longer help the pain, they may look for other ways to escape that pain. We must look deeper than drugs and alcohol to identify these problems. Suicide does not care when it comes to who is affected. Anyone of all ages can be affected. This is vital to always remember in case someone starts saying or doing things out of the ordinary. The mental health of students have come into the spotlight more in the recent years, as cases of depression, anxiety, and stress have skyrocketed. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented many challenges to students, educators, and parents. Children already coping with mental health conditions have been especially vulnerable to the changes. Now we are learning about the broad impacts on students because of schools being closed, physically distancing guidelines, and isolation and other unexpected changes to their lives. Here are some of the negative effects of social isolation. Sleep disruption. Sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Loneliness, alone at home with no contact with others. Depression, 1 or 2 weeks of sadness that has already disrupted their everyday activities. Stress and anxiety, worrying about finances or school or getting exposed. And post-traumatic stress disorder. Although the focus of this topic has been teens, it is also vital for adults to take care of themselves to prevent suicidal thoughts. Here are some helpful ways to care for your mental health during and after social isolation. Eat healthier, get moving, practice relaxation, and make meaningful connections. They may sound simple or as common knowledge, but they do make a difference in how we feel. Knowing when to seek treatment for suicide can be impactful and save a life. If you have signs of anxiety, depression, chronic loneliness, or hopelessness, and your enjoyment of life is being negatively impacted, it is time to get help. Early intervention results in better mental health outcomes. The effects of recent social isolation on mental health will continue to be felt for some time. If you are struggling, you are not alone, and you do matter. Additionally, you may call any of these numbers to seek out treatment. You can call us at Palms Behavioral Health at 956-365-2600 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. Thank you for joining me. Remember, we are here for you and your loved ones. Take care.